Hello developers, welcome to my video series on Microsoft Flight Simulator add-on workflow. Today we're going to talk about XML templates and how to decode them for your own project. Maybe you want to add a sunshade or pull down shade for your business aircraft or your general aviation aircraft. Or maybe you just want a visor in the cockpit. These can easily be made from existing Asobo templates and modified for your needs. I will talk a bit about programs and the terminology used, like variables, functions, the main programs, conditions, and program flow. So what is a program? It's a series of steps laid out in order to accomplish a task. So an example is you're in a strange city and you ask a person nearby, how do I get to the museum? And they answer in a series of steps. And the steps you take to walk to the museum. You take the main street from here. So take main street, go 2 blocks, and you want to go 2 blocks south. And then you turn left, go 1 block east, and you are at the museum. So basically you have 5 steps in this program on how to get to the museum. And they gave you a program, a series of steps that you follow in order. Otherwise you might not be at the museum. You might be somewhere else and lost in the city. So a program again is just a series of steps that you follow in order to accomplish a task. In the sim, we have 4 languages that you can use to program. In our museum example, we used English. We use the English language to explain or to say what the steps are to get to the museum. And in programming for the sim, we have a number of languages. We have 4 of them. C++, which is pretty advanced. JavaScript, which is similar to C++ and let's say on the advanced level. There's RPN, and it's called reverse postfix notation, and there is sometimes called reverse Polish notation, just because it was invented a long time ago when political correctness was, well, you know. But it was invented by a Polish mathematician, so that's probably where it's got its name. In concert with those languages, we also have the Asobo people making XML a programming language too. It's not really. We're going to use XML and RPN to start, and just XML first. But a little bit more on programs. My museum example was very minimal. You had to be right at the same position to use those steps every single time. But what if you're not? A bit more questions need to be answered, so you have to have some way of checking conditions. Perhaps if I'm at the northwest end of the city, I need to go east and south. And if I'm in the northeast end, I just need to go south. And if I'm at the north end, I just need to go south and east. And if I'm in the east, I just need to look around because I'm probably right there. You get the idea. I have to first figure out where I'm starting. Okay, too simple, but these are if conditions, and that's part of programming. If something is true, you do this, and if something is false, you do something else. Now I'm a bit lazy. I don't want to walk. So what do I do in that case? I'll take a taxi. So my new program would be step 1, hail a taxi. Step 2, tell the taxi driver to take me to the museum. I'm done. Because the taxi driver is going to take me to the museum. Step 2 is a function. So what it is a way of reusing code that has already been developed by somebody else or by yourself. So the taxi driver knows the way to the museum from anywhere in the city because he has his own program to get you to the museum. You don't have to know how he gets you to the museum. You just ask him, take me to the museum, and he does that for you. Well, in the sim, we have those functions already. Those are basically the XML templates. So the XML templates are just like functions that we use. Asobo has already created them, and we can reuse them. So we basically, in the XML code, we do a use template with a name. And basically, we say what template we want to use because Asobo has already developed it, and away you go. Let's have one last thing. We need to talk about variables. And basically, let's make that a little bigger. Variables are containers that hold a number or a string of characters. There's some value that can be changed, or it can be a constant value in your program. To use the taxi, we need money. So our wallet is a variable. It can contain cash, and maybe your wife has a purse, and she has the credit cards, naturally. So combining the steps, conditions, and functions, we're going to redo our taxi example. We'll hail a taxi. We'll tell the taxi driver to take me to the museum. So he knows where to go, but there's going to be another step in here. The taxi driver is going to ask you for cash or a credit card. Okay? The next thing will be a test. Do you have the cash? So, is there enough cash in the wallet? So that's one of those questions or conditions that you're going to have to determine. Is there enough cash in the wallet? Then you can pay cash. If not, use the credit card in the wife's purse. Then the taxi driver agrees, and takes you there. He takes you to the museum, and you're done. Or if there is zero cash and zero credit, you're out and you end up walking to the museum with your previous code that has how to walk to the museum from where you are. So you may find another person. So step 7 would be find a person and ask. So this program now has gotten a little more complicated. So you have a variable, you have a function, you have the steps that take you to the museum or not, and you have a bunch of information to allow you to answer certain conditions to get you to the museum. Congratulations, you're now a programmer. You know the fundamentals. There are steps, conditions, functions, variables. There's a lot more, but this is good enough for now. So the XML templates work similar to any program out there. The behaviors XML has a section on behaviors, and it contains a bunch of components. These components are basically a bunch of main programs. The programs that need to run that contain the steps for your add-on simulation to work. The first thing you might see, and you need, are other templates or functions that are already written by Asobo. And to get those in your XML file for the behaviors of your project, you need a bunch of include files. So you're going to include the Asobo common XML code. And you could also use, if you want to use the glass cockpit, Asobo glass cockpit AS100, or it's 1000, sorry. So there's a bunch of code that you're going to use from Asobo. And we have all those here, Asobo exterior, animation code, animation subtemplate, etc. So you're going to have engine data, or passenger XML files for your code that you're going to use. Let's look at some examples of what we're going to use in our project. We have the engine throttle, and it's going to use a component. And a component, let's just call these main programs. So you have a bunch of main programs that are kind of entities unto themselves, and they work one after the other. But one main program is the engine throttle levers, and the component uses a template or uses an already written function that has been designed by Asobo, the engine lever throttle template. The engine lever throttle template has a bunch of variables or containers to keep information. The container name is TT underscore description underscore ID, and then there's TT underscore description index, and then there's a variable called ID, which contains the number 1. The description index contains a number 1, and this one contains a macro. It's got the @ sign at the beginning. So there's one use template or one function that's inside the engine throttles. And then there's a second one, a second function, which is engine lever propeller template that we have in this component. So our add-on has both an engine throttle and an engine lever for the propeller. So we can combine these two functions together in one component. So let's look at the code for the Asobo engine throttle template. And we'll find that hopefully in the engine XML. So I have magnetos. It's probably looking at all sorts of things here. Switch magnetos, propeller control. Don't need that one. What we're looking for, there we are. We're looking for the template or the function Asobo engine lever throttle template. Well, this template uses another template, or it has another function that it's going to look for. So the engine lever has a throttle template, and then the engine throttle template, which contains an interaction type variable. That interaction type variable contains the characters that spell out lever. So we're going to use this template. So we're going to go up to this template area here, and we're going to use that template to make our throttle work. The parameters now, there's a bunch of additional parameters which are ID and their default parameters, meaning that if you didn't set the ID, this template would automatically set the ID. And the way you use a variable is with the hashtags. So the hashtag says, go get what's in the ID variable, so it contains 1, and plop it into this position. So if we plop it into that position, we basically have the node ID changing from hashtag to 1. It's basically the same as if we did this, but we're using a variable to be populated inside another variable. I'll just get rid of that because that'll mess things up. And then this template is going to call another template. So the Asobo engine throttle subtemplate. So when we go to the subtemplate, Asobo engine throttle subtemplate is now a huge template that we need to go through. Well, I'm not going to go through every single part of this, but you see that it gets very, very complicated quite quickly. So we're into the engine subtemplate XML file, and we got that because it included that file, subtemplates, engine subtemplates. So we got access to this code via that include statement. And I've collapsed a bit of the information here just so that we can take one step at a time. This template, now collapsed, has basically a bunch of parameter conditions. So there's parameter default, and remember that parameter default means make a bunch of parameters if they aren't already set, and use the information there. So this is simple to decode because the parameters default, the node ID, is a combination of letters and variables that need to be replaced. So basically what we're doing here, the node ID has to be something with the word engine and underscore, the interaction type variable, so those hashtags mean this is a variable. Then there's just a bunch of letters, the throttle underscore or underscore throttle underscore, and then the ID node, which was obtained before. ID node variable has ID, which was 1, so ID node contains 1. So we're going to change this just to show you interaction type. Well, the interaction type was from before, and we set that to the word lever. So the interaction type is going to be lever without the hashtags, and then the ID node will be 1. So basically the node ID with all of these variables and hashtags gets simplified down to just engine, lever, throttle 1. And that's the node ID that we used in our blend file. The animation name is basically just the same. It's engine, lever, throttle 1. And then the part ID is engine, lever, throttle without the 1. So all of those variables are set. We then have a condition after that. So we've set these 3 variables, node ID, animation ID, part ID, and we have a condition code which is called a switch statement. A switch statement basically works on cases. If the interaction type contains the word lever, which it does, you will do all of this code. So the interaction type, case lever, okay, so everything in between the 2 case statements, starting and ending, gets executed. It's a condition check. Is it an Airbus type? Well, we had no variable called Airbus, so that's false. And that being false means that none of this information gets executed. So I'm just going to collapse that. The reset limit is set to blank because there's nothing in between here anymore. Process limits is another variable, and it contains a bunch of RPN. So the A throttle lower limit position 16K is stuck into the O variable XML min limit, and the 16384 is stuck into the max limit. So those are the process limit variable. A drag axis, a position type, a position var, O position, a delta min, and access, a use trajectory, no arrows. So a whole bunch of variables get set for anything later on in the code. There's a condition, afterburner, we don't have that, we don't have that, we don't have that, so nothing in here needs to be looked at or gets executed. So that's switch statement. Then it has a parameter, default parameter for the tooltip, the increment, the scroll. Very, very complicated. Just a bunch of variables are being set. So we've done that switch, we've done that parameter, so we're finished that. Now there's a bunch of parameters that are override. And they get override if we have a condition. Well, we don't have this condition, so we don't need to worry about that. But we do need to worry about this next parameter override, which has a switch condition of interaction type. So basically another case statement. And the value for the case is lever. We're going to do all of this stuff that's in between the case statements. So a switch statement can contain another switch statement which has a check for lever type matching Boeing. Well, we don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have that. So the default will be set these values to the required information, either a number or some RPN code. So a little bit gets done here. Another default with a switch interaction type. The case statement becomes a little bit more, a lot more. A condition use trajectory. No, we don't, so we don't need that. Main, snap. All of these values are used later on in the Asobo code. We have a test condition. Do we have this and this? If it was true, we would execute that code. But it's not true, so we don't even need it. So just a bunch of variables get set, and that's it. So that parameter is done. Another parameter, switch type, a bunch of condition codes. We don't have that, so it's not true, but it is false. So that gets set, and this animation code gets set to that. Note that the ID or a 1 gets plopped into there. Do we have ground animation? True. No, it's false. We don't have that, so ground throttle animation code is set to blank. So that switch condition is done, not empty. We don't do that, so that's done. The parameter override, switch interaction type is lever, is the switch param lever type. No, it's nothing. It's not Boeing, it's not Airbus, it's not that, so it's default. And more argument checks, we don't have that, it's false, so just to get this one variable to be set. So that's done. We make a new component, and this component will have an ID based on the node ID that was developed before. Parameters default, more parameters that are being used, tooltips that are being set. Do we have this condition? No, so I'm not even going to use it. Do we have this condition? No. Switch interaction type, again, lever, the lever case statement. Oh, there's a lot. So has that? No. So this case statement is huge, and it's basically more of the same, checking conditions, etc. So you can see that templates and code gets reused over and over and over. Well, we really didn't need to go through all that. I just had to show you how complicated some of these templates are. And later on in your dev career, you'll probably have to figure this out anyways if you want to reuse some of the templates that they already have. So there's a lot of RPM. We'll talk about that later on in another episode when we explain things, and we'll review that later. So let's add a visor to our model, and we'll reuse the Asobo template that will move the visor. You can put it in front of the windshield or store it away, and you can set it to any position in between. That sounds like a lever. We already had a bunch of levers in our aircraft, the cabin heat and air, so let's reuse those templates for our sun visor lever. let's make our own new XML template. To do that, just create a blank sheet and add the model behaviors tags to it. I'm just going to make my own here. Since we're going to use the cabin heat levers, I'm making my own template for passengers. They called it GS614_passengers XML. And we're going to include some files that are required for the passenger templates to work. So there's a couple of include statements here. Just remember that you should make your own XML with your own company name. I'm using GS614, so I'm prefixing everything with GS614 where Asobo was. So the passengers template, where are the passengers? There we are. The cabin air templates are a lever cabin air, which basically just uses cabin air and says the interaction type is lever to make that. So I'm just going to copy this code into my own shades template. So I'm going to say that it's 614 passenger shades template, and it would have been, oops, let's go back to the passenger. Just going to copy that and go back. So I'm just going to use passenger cabin air, and I'm going to make a GS614 passenger shades template. Everything will be basically the same. I'm going to use the helper code, which just adds the suffix variable and uses passenger cabin air, but I'm going to have it use my passenger shades subtemplate. So that is basically, I'm going to utilize the passenger shades subtemplate, which is just a copy of the passengers cabin air subtemplate. And the reason I use this is because it will use the cabin base template, which has all of the other information, which you see gets a lot more complicated, just like the throttle lever does. So I'm using this template in my own code. So same thing. There are some things that I need to change and some things that I don't need to change. Basically, this is cabin air, and it's a Sobo, so I had to change that to GS614 and shades. And then my passenger interaction type is shades, not cabin air. I'm using the lever interaction type, so I'm using a lever anyways. I don't really need that code. So I do not need that switch statement, and that's why you see no switch statement here. It's just a lever. So I'm going to use that and see how it goes. This uses the Asobo cabin base, which is pulled from that. So basically, my passengers looks like that. I've got this shade using a shade subtemplate, which uses the cabin base. And it's a lever, and it'll work. One thing I did not tell you about was the tooltips. Because before we had tooltips, which were basically macros, they have this @ sign in them, so they grab things from the tooltip package and cabin airflow. And what I did was I substituted my own. Instead of ats, I substituted English text for shades and shade set in the tooltip. And when you do that, you have to add tooltip title is dynamic true and tooltip description is dynamic to true, because this information here is really RPN. It's just basically setting these two characters, so I needed to make sure that it didn't think they were macros, but they were actual text. So that's what I had to do to that. So what we need to do is we need to call this passenger shades template from our interior file. So I have to include my GS614 passengers XML, and I'm going to put it into the templates folder under the model folder where this is. So I'm going to have a relative file, get that, and basically I am going to use the cabin air, but not the cabin air. I'm going to use the template that I'm going to make. I'm going to use it lever cabin air, wasn't lever cabin air. I'm going to, or call it, I think it was shades, right? Let's go back. I'm going to use passenger shades. The animation is passenger lever cabin air 1, and the node ID, well, instead of cabin air, I'm going to make it shades. I'm going to make that shades, invert the drag, use the same thing. So now I am calling my passengers XML code. And that passenger shade subtemplate, the node ID here will be interaction type of lever, but I have already specified these, so these not really needed, but they will not override what I already have set in the interior here. So I've set them to lever shades 1. So I've gone into Blender, into our project. I apologize, I've done some preliminary texturing from that's different from the last version of the aircraft. And I took the sunshade that was already there, I gave it a new name, the same name as what we had in here, and then we animated. So I've animated it. Remember, the more keyframes on a lever, the smoother the action will be, so I did that. Passenger lever shades. I also added in the interaction type, just to be on the safe side. I think I need it. So we get the animation name, the node name, and the interaction type is lever. And basically, now one more other thing is I saved the information in the airplanes model folder. In the model folder, I added a new folder called templates, and that's where I put my GS614 passengers. Excuse me, XML. So that file is, is there underneath the models folder, and we have the proper interior with calling our folder and making sure that we have included it in templates. So the Blender file, we export that and build it in the sim, and what we get is the aircraft, all right, with a sunshade, and the sunshade turns on, and I can just use my mouse wheel to move it. And the tooltips, there, I can even drag it, tells you what percentage that it's open and closed. And then I can set it to wherever I want. That's why I made it a lever rather than a button. A button would be on, off, it would be deployed and not deployed. So here I can set it to whatever, position I want. So that's how it works. So now you can move the sun visor, and I only did one, didn't do the other one. And we have our own code taken from the Asobo code and modified slightly so that we can make our own XML to work. Well, there you have it. You learned about basic programming and how they relate to XML templates. And remember how to get to the museum, and that'll be it. And then pull the particular code that you want from any of the templates that they have. I used the cabin air and the subtemplate. Put those into my GS614 passengers template, save that to the templates folder under the model folder, and then added all of the requirements to the Blender model, exported that, rebuilt it in the sim, and I have my own template that allows me to move the shades. In our next episode, we'll look at the next part of our add-on build. We'll continue with a bit more complicated animations using the dials and the instruments. So needles will move and parts will move on the dials. I've already started adding the proper textures. You can do that too, but we'll do that in the next episode. And good luck, and see you next time.